Very often, check, 1, 2, check, yep, good. This is the season very often of wanting. It's Christmas, right? And it's like, what do you want for Christmas? And I'll tell you something, the thing that stresses me out the most in this season is people ask me like, what do you want? What do you want? What does somebody else want? What do they want? I'm like, I don't know. But let me tell you who knows what they want. I'm trying to do better of not using my oldest as an illustration because he's in here, so I'll use my youngest. So my youngest, Levi, this is a man who knows what he wants. Like, he loves Amazon. Loves it. Like, that's his favorite thing to get on is he just likes to get on Amazon, and he knows how to make his own list. He's been making his own list for months now. And he just gets on there and he just keeps adding things to it. And like, it's amazing. You'd be surprised, like all the things he can find on Amazon. And one of the things that you have to try to, remind a child, and we have to remind ourselves as adults, is just because you want something doesn't mean you actually have room for it. Just because you want something doesn't mean you have room for it, okay? So this isn't just a kid problem, right? Okay, so you go open your cabinets, there's not any room. You go open your closet, there's not any room. You like wherever the space might be, you go to your garage or that room you call your guest room that's really just your junk room. You know what I'm saying? Like we want things, but just because you want things doesn't mean you actually have room for those things. And very often, because we have we have all these things we want, what happens is we fill personally our hearts and our minds and our souls with things that we want, and by doing so, we actually neglect the things we actually need. And then all of a sudden you start thinking, man, like I need these things in my life, but just because you need something does not mean, in fact, you have room for that thing. You can't have what you don't have room for. You can't have what you don't have room for. That's kind of the thesis for this series called Make Room. It's an Advent series, and we're looking at what does it look like to make room in our hearts and our minds for hope, which was last week, peace, which is this week, joy, which is next week, and love, which is our Christmas experience. Is that we need to make room for these things, because I don't know if any of you have figured this out, but I have. Is that in this life, hope, joy, peace, love, it's not just an automatic. It's not just an automatic, because what happens if you don't make room for it, you will fill it with the opposite. You will fill your hearts and minds with the opposite. And so the question is, how do we make room today for peace? We did this last week. We'll do it again this week. It'll be a lot of compare and contrast in this series. But what is the difference between the world's definition of peace and God's definition of peace? Because one of the things we have to start doing as followers of Jesus is we have to start reworking our minds and replacing the world's definitions of things for God's definitions. Because when you do so, you replace a lie with a truth. And so what we're gonna look at this morning is, how does the world view the word peace? And I think, let me give a couple of examples of how I think the world views peace. If two countries are fighting each other and they are at war, and finally, after however long this war goes on, they decide to finally drop the guns, and they're not gonna, drop any more bombs. They call it a ceasefire, and during a ceasefire, it's called peacetime. And so in the world's mind, peace is when the guns stop firing. Peace is when the bombs start dropping, or let's make it a little bit more, less, cataclysmic. Let's just look at personal relationships. If you are having an argument with somebody, you're in a disagreement, you're in a little bit of a tiff, very often the way the world says that peace happens is when the shouting stops. Is when the shouting stops. Okay, now we've found a place of peace. You see, worldly peace is the absence of fighting. Worldly peace is the absence of fighting. Or maybe to give you another picture, I think the world defines peace as calmness. I think the world can define peace as calmness. Like, I don't know if any of you are nature people, but I think that one of the most peaceful pictures that I think our world can have is God's creation's amazing. You're sitting by a pond, you're sitting by a lake, and you're out there before any boats are in the water. You're out there before any kids are skipping rocks or anybody throws a fishing pole, cast a fishing pole. And what happens is the water is just completely still. You know what happens when you throw that rock in there, right, is all of a sudden you see that ripple that just goes all the way across. But that beauty of calmness is that we think that very often, like that's just like when things are calm. That's what peace is according to the world's definition. But God has a different definition of peace that I think is much more life transforming. You see, the word for peace in Hebrew is the word shalom. If you want to know what it looks like, actually just go ask Jeremy Hyde to show you his arm. It's tattooed on his forearm, okay? It's the word shalom means more than just the absence of fighting. It means more than just calm circumstances, okay? The word shalom means harmony. Biblical peace is the idea of harmony. Living in harmony with God, living in harmony with other people, living in harmony with God's creation. This is God's idea of peace. It's the idea of things being whole. You see, here's what we have to understand. The difference between the world and God's definition of truth is that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of harmony. Let me look back at those examples and show you the difference. If two nations are shooting at each other and fighting each other, just because there is a ceasefire does not mean they actually are at harmony with each other. It doesn't mean they actually don't hate each other. It does not mean they all of a sudden became friends. Let me ask you, think about the last argument you were in with someone that you love. Just because you stopped arguing, was everything all of a sudden better? Stopping the argument does not equal harmony between two people. See, what peace is when things are brought back to their proper place. It's when things are brought back together. And what we're gonna be looking at today is Isaiah chapter 40. We're gonna be looking at verses 1 through 11. You can open up there, click there, stare there. We'll be in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 11. And what we're gonna find here is that God is speaking to the people of Israel. And their circumstances, according to the world's definition, would be impossible for peace. Their circumstances would be impossible for peace, but God shows he has a different definition for peace for us that transcends circumstances. It says this in chapter 40, verse 1 and 2. It says, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. When peace is lacking, comfort is needed. And I just love like this pastoral heart of God here in this moment that's speaking to a people. And to give it context of what their circumstances were, they were in exile. Okay, for like the past 150 years or so, the people of Israel had been in exile, meaning they'd been taken from their homes, they had been taken away from their stuff. Very often they'd been separated from their families, and not only were they kicked out of their house, they were taken to a foreign land, and in that land they were oppressed, and in that land they were poor, and they did not have freedom. This was their existence, and they are under Babylonian captivity. And in the midst of that, all of a sudden, God speaks the words, comfort. Anybody need a word of comfort this morning? I do. As he speaks the word comfort to those who were in a very unpeaceful situation, according to the world's definition. Here's what happened. Why were they in exile? They were in exile because of their sin, okay? It's not popular to talk about sin, but the goal of a church and a pastor is not to be popular, okay? Is that the reality is, it's always been the case. And even today, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, which I'll get to, it's still true, there is always consequence for sin. There is always consequence for sin. And the people of Israel, they had rebelled against God. They had been sinning. They had idols. They'd taken on to the customs and the ways of the people around them. And you know what? God loves us, but that doesn't mean there's not consequences for when we rebel against God. And so what happened was they were experiencing God's judgment, but all of a sudden God says, hey, listen, when he says this, that their hard service has been completed, their sin has been paid for, he's like, look, you know what? You've experienced consequence for your sin. I am bringing you home like a shepherd goes after its sheep. But here's what this is a bigger picture of. This is a picture of what Jesus ultimately does. Advent is a season that longs for the arrival of Jesus. The word Advent means arrival. And so what this is a longing for here is the first coming of Jesus, the first Advent. It's a longing for, the fact that here's the reality of all of our purpose. We were created to have a relationship with God. You're like, what's my purpose in life? Look, I don't know your gifts. I don't know all your talents. I don't know what your skill set is, but I can tell you, that does not all matter to me when it comes. If you would ask me, what is my purpose? It is to know God and to be known by him. You were created to have a relationship with God. But when sin entered the world, when we sinned against God, it broke that relationship. It broke that relationship because what was perfect had become tarnished. But what's beautiful is in this picture, what we see is that what Jesus came and what he did is that he came and he lived the perfect life that we could not live. This baby born at Christmas grew up, lived a life of 33 years and did not sin a single time, praise God. He lived a sinless life that I could not live. And it says that the wages of sin is death. My sin separated me from God. That doesn't make God a hateful God. It just happens to make him a perfect and good God. That needs to be clear in our culture today. A God that is a judge isn't evil. He's just perfect and he's good. And Jesus said, hey, you know what? I'm gonna come and I'm gonna take your sentence. I'm gonna die on the cross in the same way he said, hey, I comfort you, Israel, you get to come back home now. Jesus died on the cross so that we could come home permanently. So that we could come home permanently. He said, hey, your sin has been paid for. And I just wanna speak this over you. I'm not Isaiah, but in the same way that Isaiah spoke over the people of Israel, if you are a follower of Jesus today, if you have repented and you have said, I confess my sin, I confess Jesus is Lord, I turn my life over to him. If that's your story today, can I just say to you, comfort. Listen, I don't know what all is going on in your life, but I can tell you, I know in my life, I know in some of your lives that I know the details, not everything around you is quote unquote worldly peaceful, but in the midst of that, I say comfort to you, people of God. I say comfort to you when I speak tenderly to you and tell you your sin has been paid for. Jesus died on the cross so that you could be welcomed home. It says this in verse 3, it says, a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This passage we see in the Gospels is a prophecy that predicts the coming and the purpose of John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus. 700 years before John the Baptist, Isaiah spoke this word, which spoke of what John the Baptist would one day do. Okay, and what was the goal? What was the purpose of John the Baptist? It fits at Advent. There's a reason John the Baptist is a main character in the Advent season. His job was to prepare the way for the arrival of Jesus. Advent means arrival. Do you know what our job is? We're meant to be like John the Baptist after the resurrection. We are meant to prepare the way for the second coming of Jesus. We are meant to look at John the Baptist and the way that he prepared for the first, and it should give us insight of how we prepare the way for the second coming of Jesus. Advent looks forward to the second coming because we have confidence in the first coming. That is what it is about, is that we anticipate the second coming. Now, here's what's concerning to me when I get to verse 3. He just said comfort twice. Awesome. No, as if I'm Israel, things have been trashed for a long time. Like really, really trash. 150 years of being in exile. He said comfort twice. That means we're out of here, right? Right? Like he said, he's speaking tenderly to me. That means he's about to come, smite the Babylonians right now. Like that spiritual bus is coming. We're going back to Jerusalem. Like it's all going down. And then he goes, a voice of one calling in the wilderness. I have a plan for you. Prepare the way for the Lord. Whoa. Why'd you say wilderness, God? Like you said comfort. Comfort and wilderness in scripture do not match. Why would you say wilderness? Well, here's one thing to note. Comfort wasn't dependent upon circumstances according to God. Comfort wasn't dependent upon circumstances according to God. Comfort was dependent upon the peace of God. If you want comfort, then receive the peace that's already been given. See, they still weren't home. They still were oppressed. Can I say this? Why does this passage in Isaiah have anything to do with you this morning? Because I want to let you know this, okay? Just ready? If I were to ask you where you're from, I don't want to know your address, okay? I don't want to know your zip code. I don't want to know what town you're from. This is hard for us to guess because it's like, where am I from? Well, I'm American. No. Here's the truth. Paul says that our true citizenship is in heaven, which we need to pay close attention when we read passages like this in Isaiah about people in exile, because we are a people in exile. We are a people that live in a spiritual Babylon. This is not our home. The problem is, the reason our faith so often is not abundant is because we try to add Jesus to what the world says is abundant. But we are meant to be exiles. We are meant to be resident aliens living in a different place. This place is not our home. The only way to experience comfort and peace in this land is to understand this is not my land. That I have comfort in the fact that I am in exile and that I have a peace that this world cannot offer me. I'll say this again. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of harmony. But I'm gonna also say this. How are these people supposed to experience comfort when he's giving them a mission that still involves the wilderness? Well, it's this. Peace isn't the absence of disturbing things. It's the absence of being disturbed. Peace isn't the absence of disturbing things. It's the absence of being disturbed. That does not mean that we should not mourn with those that mourn. That does not mean that there won't be things that there's grief in this world. It means this. We live in a world, the more than I've ever seen in my life, that is offended by every daggone thing. Just everything disturbs us. Everything bothers us. Everything's offensive. Listen, do you want to know what a peaceful life looks like? It looks like someone who's not disturbed by everything that you see and everything that is said. Peace is someone who's tapped into contentment. Tapped into contentment. You know what? The reason that he gave them the words comfort in the wilderness was because he would be in the wilderness. Peace is not found in a circumstance, it's found in a person, and his name is Jesus. And that where he is, peace is found. To prepare for the arrival of God. That was their purpose. God gave them a purpose. He said, I've got a job for you. Anybody here is like, you love to you love to figure out like, how am I wired, right? Like Enneagram, disc profile, anybody like you really love that stuff, okay? Why do we like things like that? Not as many of you liked it as I thought. I don't like it either because don't put me in a box, man. It's like, don't put baby in a corner. Don't put Matthew in a personality box, okay? I'm 1 through 9. I'm all of them a little bit. Probably not. Jay can correct me later. They say I'm a 2, wing 3, and I don't know what that means. But everybody is wondering, what is your purpose? Okay, can I just make it easy for you? God gave you all different gifts, but all of us have the same exact purpose. It's to prepare the way for the arrival of Jesus to come back. Your purpose in this life is to prepare the way for the arrival of Jesus. Everybody wants purpose. And you're like, God, would you give me specific purpose? I don't think God unleashes purpose until you've actually received his peace. Because if you're not content to find peace in the wilderness, he's not going to be able to use you there. Because if you're someone who's constantly disturbed by all the bad things in the wilderness, you're not gonna be able to bring good news to the wilderness because all bad things disturb you so much. You see, the gospel is meant to be good news when things are good and when things are bad. You know what Christians need to stop doing? If I ask you how you're doing, if it's bad, it's okay to say this week was bad, but God is good. It's okay to say everything went down the drain according to the world, but I am peaceful because he is my comfort. To prepare the way. How are we to do that? It says, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain made low, rough ground made level. What does this mean? When you get out your GPS and it's like, I am going here, and it gives you 3 options. Which one do you choose? The shortest, right? Some of you are like, well, not me. If it has that toll on there, I ain't gonna ride on that toll because they shouldn't have put that toll on 540 because they're charging us and not them. I hear you. I respect you. Stick to your convictions. But me, I choose the shortest. I hope my transponder saves me money. I don't know if it does. But listen, is that we choose the shortest route. And what's happening is here is that the job given to the people of God was to prepare the way, meaning, hey, you know what? Like when it's a crooked path, it's a longer path. Make it as straight as possible. Make it as easy as possible for the arrival of the king. You know, the mountains, they're arduous to climb. So like flat those down. Valleys can be hard to go down into. Make those even. The purpose here was to make the way to the Lord easy. And what does that look like for us individually? Well, here's what it looks like. If you want to experience the peace of God, you've got to make room for the peace of God, which means some mountains need to be brought down, some valleys need to be filled, and some roads need to be made straight and paved. So what is it in your life that's actually keeping you from peace? Well, maybe it's one, just check yourself and see how offended you are today. And see how disturbed you are by everything of this world, and ask yourself, is Jesus truly my contentment? But also let me ask you this. Advent can also be a season of repentance. Do you know what actually will make you unprepared for the arrival of the King? Will be if there's sin in your life. You're like, well, hey, I'm set free. You know what? God gave me grace and I'm good to go. I'm going to heaven. Can I just tell you that was not the purpose of Jesus coming? The purpose was not to give you a fire, like a get out of hell free card. The purpose of Jesus' salvation was for people to live saved lives. It wasn't just to change your status. It was for you to live that new status. Does that make sense? He didn't come for you just to make a decision. He came for you to follow. He came for you to follow him. And if you want to prepare the way for the Lord, that means this. Let me tell you, if the king came, an earthly king, I'm not gonna show up dressed sloppy. I'm not gonna show up with my hair all amuck. I'm gonna take a shower. I'm gonna use both my hair products. I'm gonna get myself ready, and I'm gonna get ready for the king's arrival. Also, I'm gonna come, and if the king asks me to do certain things, listen, there would be a standard of reverence. It's like, man, he's asked me to do this. I'm going to make sure I've been doing those things when I stand before that king. The problem is, I think we've relegated Jesus down to a lower place than we would an actual earthly leader. Because we've actually made grace so daggone cheap that we don't really care how we show up when he arrives. Because as long as we get to what he gives me, what does that reveal to us? What is our whole goal of Jesus? Is it just that he gets us to where we want to be, or is it he gets us to him because he's who we want? And so let me ask you, what sin is in your life that's actually distracting you from peace in your life? Also, we're gonna do a series called Ruthless Elimination of Hurry after this in January. Sometimes the things that actually are preventing you from peace are just simply that there's no space in your brain because you fill it constantly with things that actually don't matter. It's that we live constantly distracted lives. But this matters. How do you want to be found when the king arrives? And I love this. Listen, when he comes in verse 5, what a picture. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed and all the people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Listen, one day every tribe and nation will come and they'll bow their knee and confess Jesus is Lord. And how do you want to be found when the king arrives? How do you want to be found when we approach Christmas this year? I think we just always look forward to it as this really, really special time. But listen, it's another reminder that he came and he's coming again. How do I want to be found this Christmas? It says this in verse 6. It says, a voice says, cry out. And I say, what shall I cry? All people are like grass and all their faithfulness is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. Merry Christmas. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. Say, we are grass. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever asked a congregation to repeat. I didn't have it in my script. I decided to go for it, and I'll always remember that I challenged a group of people to say, we are grass. What's the point of that, though? Well, the point of that is this, is that God just promised comfort. God just spoke tenderly to them. God just said that there's actually peace for you in the midst of the wilderness. God said, if you'll receive the peace, I'll unleash my purpose. It says that the word of the Lord had spoken. The word of the Lord had spoken. So why the need to actually, kind of put humans in their place here? Did you really have to say it like that? He did. Why? Because human beings constantly are expecting to find peace in a person whose name is not Jesus. Listen, if you're married, love your spouse. I pray that through the fruit of the Spirit in them, peace being one of them, they bring peace to your life. But if you expect them to be the one that fills you with peace, you will find yourself disappointed. If you expect your children to do that, if you expect your friends to do that, your coworker, if you expect your neighbors to do that, your parents to do that, listen, we are meant to be created in the image of God and meant to point people to Jesus, but I am not Jesus. You see, you can be at peace with people, but you cannot find your peace in people. You can be at peace with people, but you cannot find your peace in people. You can't find peace in people, but you can find it in a person, and his name is Jesus. Isaiah 9:6 says, for unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called, now say this with me, it's much cooler than the grass phrase, ready? He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Prince of Peace. If your life lacks payoff, If your life lacks peace, I said peace and chaos, and I made a word called chaos. I hope y'all enjoy me sometimes. Because honestly, I enjoy me sometimes because that was funny. I say the weirdest things I've ever heard preachers say. And if you're you want to invite a friend, just invite them to experience Jesus or invite them to see what the pastor says is weird. It's okay, just get them here. It's okay. But here's the thing. He's the only one that can dispense peace because he's the author of it. I'm not the author of peace and no one else is. He's the only one that could dispense it because he's the author of it. Peace is a person and his name is Jesus. Peace is a person and his name is Jesus. We'll wrap up with verse 9. It says, you who bring good news to Zion, go up to a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout, lift it up. Do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. I want you to notice the phrase, do not be afraid. Advent is a season of preparing the way for the coming of Jesus. The way we prepare is not being afraid to open our mouths for him. We cannot be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Romans 1:16. Man, it's a shame to be excited to be saved by him, but to be ashamed to be found with him. It says, lift it up and do not be afraid. Here is your God. This is what we are meant to be. Jesus is coming back. Hey, here is your God. Here is Jesus. It says, see, the sovereign Lord comes with power. He rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him and his recompense accompanies him. Our world defines power a very certain way, but man, this power looks different in verse 11. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. You know what peace looks like? It looks like a sheep being held by its shepherd. You know what? If that sheep is, can I promise you storms will come? Bad stuff happened yesterday. It will happen today. And honestly, sometimes my eyes aren't on Jesus and I'm a mess. Anybody else? And sometimes I'm like a sheep that when the storm is loud, when the thunder cracks and you see the lightning in the sky, everything is disturbing around me and things are hard, I'm like that sheep in the parable that runs. But I thank God that he's a shepherd that leaves the 99. He comes, finds me. And then when the storm is raging, he holds me close. Because peace has to do with proximity. The closer I am to the heart of Jesus, peace I will experience. Followers of Jesus, if you're here today, if you want peace, you need to let yourself be held by the Prince of Peace. Independence is not impressive because it doesn't exist in Christianity. Dependence is what we have and it's dependent upon him. Will you let him hold you? Your job as a Christian is not to impress your God. Your job is to be held by him. Anybody going through a storm? Storms are promised. So is the comfort of his arms. Some of you are like, I feel too ashamed to let him hold me because I've run. You see, he happens to be the shepherd that also hung on a cross. And that running that you did, that sin you committed, he says, son or daughter, I already paid for that one too. That thing that's going on around you, that you think that I don't know how I'm gonna get through, I don't know what the answer is. You don't need to be the one that figures it out. Let me hold you. Peace is found in proximity, in your closeness to Jesus. You're like, I don't feel close to Jesus. Well, make room for peace. What is it you need to move out of your life? What are the distractions? What are the habits? What are the sins? What are the things that are clogging your way for peace? What are the things you're allowing to disturb you that don't need to disturb you if Jesus is all that you need and all that matters? In the Beatitudes, he says, blessed are you, blessed are you, blessed are you. And that word blessed, it was a word used to describe the Greek gods because it meant that they were unaffected by the things of this world. You want to be blessed? It doesn't mean your circumstances necessarily get better. It means you're unaffected by the circumstances around you because you truly know what blessing is. Blessing is found in the arms of the Prince of Peace. Father, I thank you so much.